Hepi's research. This is just information about foot soldiers.
Rami Māoris use patu.
Well, Māoris made an art of the club, and they made them out of greenstone and whalebone and a sort of grey stone.
My mother once said, "What you see when you look at an archival film are resurrections taking place. A past life lives again, and something from the heart and the spirit responds."
Kia ora.
Kia ora.
What's your name?
Hepi.
Hepi
Mita.
Ah, you must be a famous relative. Who's your mum?
Merata Mita.
Ah, see, son of the master.
Although my mum is now gone, as an archivist, she shows me things in every frame, and I get to feel her presence again.
How big was the biggest foot soldier army in the world?
To my knowledge, the Persian army was huge and comprised mainly of foot soldiers. Foot soldiers don't have a very high status, but they have to be very brave and very determined to keep fighting a war.
Utana waiata, pērā me te tangi a riroriro. Engari, ko ngā mahi, pērā me te kuri.
One of my primary goals is to decolonize the screen and to indigenize a lot of what we see up there.
For me, it is blood for blood. Utu!
At the start, people used to look at me, in utter disbelief when I talked about filming. And I think it was because there are not only no Māori filmmakers in the country, but the fact that I was also a woman.
Black women in this country, Māori and Polynesian women, are the most deprived and repressed sections of the people of this country.
I thought we were here to talk about Rata Flats, not harp on about women's rights.
You better shut enough, Manny. We all know how you treat women.
I always have this desire to do things not well, but as brilliantly as possible. Once the work shows that you're capable of doing something, then all the other prejudices about race and sex may perhaps fall away.
So that's a little bit of information to start out Hepi's research.
Over here. You can come and give me a hand with the delivery. Yeah. Hold it. Slowly. Oh. Oh, red.
Scalpel?
No. Use this. Let's cut the cords of generations. Yeah.
I was just a baby when my mum became the first Māori woman to write and direct a feature film. And even though my earliest memories take place on that set, the significance of this was lost on me. Mum indulged my innocence. Work was something that just seemed to go on in the background. She liked being a mum. While her films have always surrounded me, I never saw her as a filmmaker. She integrated that into her life so naturally that when I see one of her movies, it's almost like I'm watching a memory. And what fascinates me the most are not necessarily the titles in her filmography, but the projects that she left unfinished. As an archivist, I get to discover unseen footage that has spent decades in darkness.
go to weep for the treaty that was dishonored by governments. We believed that the honor, the spirit of that treaty was unique. It promised us equality, it promised us freedom, our rights to our lands, fisheries, and birds, promised us all these things. And my kaumatus, our kaumatus, still live with that belief.
And amongst the trims and offcuts of these fragments are heights I never knew that she reached.
Your Excellency, work has been done on the wider front against South Africa's attempts to destabilise the region.
But of all my mum's untold stories, there is none greater than her own. When she passed away, she went without warning, leaving questions unanswered. And as I try to piece together that story, from old home movies through to Hollywood feature films, I get a glimpse of the woman she was, and she shows me things that I've never seen before.
Bloodstained your heels, and you weren't satisfied without people dying. You then took the land. You're taking it still.
But the most consistent thing I see in all her films are the recurring cameos of my brothers and sister.
It wasn't a normal sort of upbringing, but I just got used to it, really. I didn't really have any say in what she was going to be doing.
By the time I started, I had children, and that was my only base of support, and they were fairly young, but it excited them, you know, that I was making films, and it was kind of inconceivable because it just simply didn't exist. But that's not how you think of it at the time. Like, you wish you had that community that, you know, people are now aware of and start building. And when it's not there, you know, your family is that becomes that community. And, you know, they're the worst treated in the whole thing.
Mum was tough, and it was because she was tough on herself as well, and she expected she would work to a standard, and she'd expect everyone else to work to that standard too.
When the stress was showing too much, Mum would actually just pack us in the car and just drive off to like the West Coast for a bit of solitude. And we actually used to love those times. I guess she set the example for us. You know, Mum wasn't going to cry about it, and neither were we. She just got on and made the movie. And we just got on being tamariki.
I call them home movies because in almost every project that Mum worked on, she had us kids working on it too.
On a weeknight, we might find ourselves in some sort of dull room, having to wait for this meeting to finish. That was always going to be 5 minutes away, sort of thing. You know, and it'd be 11 o'clock at night by the time that you actually got home. That was one example of how it wasn't always fun. But on the other hand, I found myself in places doing things that I never imagined. And so it was a mixed bag.
I come from a generation with very different ideas and ways of doing things. I was brought up with a community in a family of 9 children with various relatives opting in and out of the house all the time. And that was a way of working that I knew and liked best. I was used to it. And so I went back to it in the way I make films.
when did you first see a movie or film?
When I was a kid, the theatre owner who used to screen the films into Puki used to travel out to Maketu and screen films on the local marae. So I remember vividly that one, Scott of the Antarctic. That was, I mean, it was one time where everyone was silent. You know, and the cowboy pictures in that, everyone participated.
Right,
You know, look out behind you, get behind the rocks. You know,
I've always heard those stories.
it was so natural, so normal, and you could do it. You know, in that environment, everyone did it.
But Scott of the Antarctic, they sat silent.
But everyone was very silent in Scott of the Antarctic, and that's why I remembered it.
Were you somehow, as a young person, aware then of the great power of cinema to make an audience of boisterous people silent?
In that instance, yes. But before that, my grandfather was building our meeting house at Maketu. And as kids, we were allowed to just watch this intensity going on as he carved. And I think it was during that time that, you know, the seed, the power, you know, image, storytelling, because all those carvings was bound up with story, with history. To me, part of filmmaking, a wairua is a very active force in filmmaking. What you see happening a lot has to do with another energy from somewhere else that, you know, you're connected with as a person.
I remember in the death of one of our uncles, she was mentioning how the tohu, or the sign, was a big gust of wind coming through the house. And it was a portent of a death in the family, and she put that in Māori. Those values from those customs were passed down to Mum through Kolo, through her father, and also through her mother, who was a big influence.
My mother told me the stories when I was a young girl. They had a very close relationship with whales in those days, and the whales would come all the way up the harbour, all the way up to the hot springs. And they would rest there in the hot water, and the people would interact with them. And then when they went back out to sea again on the high tide, having rested and bathed in the hot water and had their barnacles cleaned off them by the people down there, you know, the mist would roll down again, and under cover of that, like cloaked by it, they would then go back out to sea. And the deepness of the whale stories are just really something I treasure, a taonga to me from my mother.
Koro's house.
This is the old master bedroom.
Yep.
This is Kolo and Nana's room. We never really came in this room when we were kids because that was Kolo and Nana's room.
Now you have the rare privilege.
Yeah. Oh, the lounge, yeah. God. So the old grand piano used to be over here.
Yep.
Which we always used to try and play. And all the photos, family photos were here and on the wall here. She was bright at school. She was a head prefect at Te Puke College. And it was recognised that, you know, she possibly had a lot of talent. And I think Koro and Nana recognised that as well.
My father was just, that's what you did in small town Kawera, she had her job as a teacher, Dad worked at the mill, you got married and had your 2.5 kids or whatever and lived happily ever after.
My mother was always so headstrong that it's hard to imagine her as a housewife. That particular phase was one she had long left behind by the time I was born. The only insight I have of her attempting to conform to that kind of lifestyle is from an interview recorded in this book.
The marriage almost drove me crazy. I was economically dependent, although quite capable of earning. My husband strongly resisted my going back to work. We had open fights about it. I went on teaching after my third son. I pushed all my energy into it. It was almost an obsession. It contributed to the breakdown of my marriage. But my unhappy marriage was why I did it.
She was a tough nut, She was really tough and she didn't like to show any weakness. But I did see her cry once. The only time I saw her cry was over Lars.
Lars was our fourth brother born to our dad and mum. He just passed away one night in his cot, and I remember quite vividly what happened, that mum and dad found him unresponsive in his cot, and we were desperately trying to revive him, and dad was swinging him around outside, and there was a doctor who lived behind us, and I remember dad jumped over the fence and woke up someone in the house, but the doctor I don't think was home, and the fellow would try to get hold of the doctor, but it was already too late. I think he'd already passed.
I never knew that I once had another brother. I found out about Lars by reading about him in these pages, and she doesn't even mention him by name. I'm not sure what speaks more to the influence Lars' death had on her, the way she described her feelings in this passage, or her silence on the subject.
A whole heap of guilt and blame fell on me like a thunderclap. It was a humbling experience. I read it as a sign that I'd become corrupt. I was dishonest staying in the marriage. I hadn't had the guts to step outside conventional morals. And when that child died, I thought, this is retribution. I caused it to happen, and I'm getting out.
But there was far more to this story.
There's been this narrative in the family that Mum was happily married with 4 sons. My father came along, she's pregnant to my dad, and then while she's pregnant with me, our younger brother Lars dies as a baby.
That was another thing that came as a complete surprise to us, was that Mum had formed a relationship with one of her students, who was Mahuta, who's Bob and Awate's father. And I had absolutely no idea about that. I don't think a lot of people knew.
My mother was 28 years old. Mahuta was 19. And the controversy of her forbidden relationship would force her to move to the city and leave the life she knew behind.
To a certain extent, our koro blamed Mum for what had happened. So we didn't have any contact with them. And the saddest thing was, I don't think we saw our grandmother. The next time we saw her, she passed away.
Why do people have to die, Nanny?
Because they got another place to go to.
Will you be going to Hawaii?
Won't be long now. Your Nanny's getting old and tired.
That's because we walked a long way.
No, your Nanny's tired from all the living she's done.
I don't want you to die, Nanny.
We'll all be going to Hawaii in the end.
Growing up, I didn't know what a half-brother or half-sister was. We were a whānau, and we looked after each other. Even though we looked different and had different dads, none of that mattered. Mum instilled an unconditional love of family in all of us. But at the greatest crossroads of her own life, she defied those values. And as uneasy as I feel shedding light on these times, the long-term consequences of those events shaped the woman she would become.
My earliest memories of Mum, I remember feeling very loved. I remember my first day of school and her dropping me off and the excitement and joy that I experienced when she came to pick me up from school. I do have memories, and they're memories that I feel as opposed to memories that I see. And near memories of feeling Mum for the way that my dad treated Mum.
Mahuta, I think, was trying to find work, and it was just very difficult because he was a fellow who was quite young himself, barely out of school. And if you think about it, you know, if you're 19 years old, taking on the responsibility of a woman and 3 kids is pretty tough.
I really don't like thinking about it much because it was really violent. There was a lot of violence in the house. I remember the police coming over, and back in those days, they used to think of a man beating up his wife as just a domestic. So they wouldn't do anything, you know, and we were little kids, and Mum would be bloodied, you know. He knocked her out. He was really vicious.
That happened for quite a long period before Mum made the decision, I think, to end the relationship. It got to a point where she realised it couldn't carry on. And so, yeah, Mum became a solo parent.
It is difficult to maintain Māoritanga in the city. Everything in the city is based on how much money you have. In the country area, there is a greater sense of community, there is much more sharing, and the contact is very close. It was such a difficult task trying to find a house that the only way I saw around it was to lie about my situation. In phone interviews, I used a European name. In confrontation with a landlord, I sent Pākehā friends. I lied about the number of children I had. I said I only had 1. Then I wove an elaborate story about suddenly being found with 4 children because their mother was ill or some such. And this is what it does to you. It makes a liar out of you, a cheat. Landlords know more than anyone how difficult it is for a woman who is a solo parent, as well as a Māori, to find accommodation. And because they know this, they exploited my position by pressuring me to have sex in order to have decent accommodation. I found this absolutely disgusting. At that stage, I had nothing left except my self-respect, my pride, and I certainly wasn't going to give that away.
Back in the days, there was no DPB or anything, but I think, well, she didn't believe in that anyway. She believed in working for her money, and I think at one time she had 3 jobs.
I used to do things like get up at 4 o'clock in the morning and make cakes and sandwiches and deliver them to milk bars and dairies and so on to sell. And then get home about 7:30, get the kids off to school.
Did you mention doing a bit of stacking of wood there?
Yeah, and we used to bag firewood for sale. The whole family did.
We all knew how to do Mum's signature on the checkbook when we were going through the shopping to get our kai. But, you know, there were things like, there were times when the checks would bounce, you know, and Richard would have to steal food. There were times when there wasn't that much. But we knew how to get by.
There was a time when we were kids and we'd been accused of stealing, and the shopkeeper reached over and pulled Bob's hair. And so we went home and we told Mum, oh, the shopkeeper accused us of stealing and pulled Bob's hair. Oh my God, she just chucked us straight into the car. We went straight back to the dairy. She marches in there with us and like, is that him? And we're like, yeah. Then she reaches over the counter, grabs his hair and is going, how do you like it? How dare you touch my child? You know, like, so, you know, we knew like she was always going to be there.
But it wasn't just her kids who she would find herself standing up for. Mum would share her struggles on national television. This would be the first time she ever appeared on screen.
I knew nothing about contraception when I married. It wasn't until after the birth of my third child that I heard about contraception, and then in whispered undertones that made it sound unpleasant. I was becoming quite distraught at the thought of having children, one after the other, without any say in the matter. So I decided I would go and see the local doctor. He lectured at me. He asked me why I felt it was necessary to limit the growth of my family. He questioned it on moral grounds. He was most unhelpful. When I found myself pregnant for the 6th time, I was in a position where I felt I couldn't possibly cope with the birth of another child. For various reasons, finance, the state of the house we lived in, emotional, all kinds of pressures. I really felt that I just couldn't cope. So I sought the advice of a friend who referred me to a very sympathetic and understanding doctor. And from there, I was able to make a decision about having an abortion, which I then proceeded to do. I understand that there's such a strong cultural bias against abortion. I felt really alienated, very much alone, and there was no one, no Māori woman that I knew that I could go to for sympathy, for understanding about my situation. I felt it important that I could put this experience to practice by putting myself in the position of an ally for Māori women who have to make such a difficult decision.
There were times around us when you would see that she was hurt, that things had affected her or were affecting her. You know, children ask things, they're direct, they're innocent, you know, why are you doing it? Why don't you just stop, sort of stuff, because everything's simple, you know, in the way that I was thinking. And she said, yeah, that if she doesn't do it, then no one else will. Like it. Basically, those people would have become invisible, their voices wouldn't be heard. And she had this strong sense of, not a responsibility, but almost like a duty. My reaction to a lot of that stuff was just to hug her.
To witness the vulnerabilities she showed in Māori women in a Pākehā world was a side of her I had never seen before. Her film history starts with this program. It starts as a solo mother. She didn't get into filmmaking to satisfy any sort of ambition. She got into it to document the issues she faced on a daily basis. And her reputation as a mother would soon be surpassed by her reputation as a filmmaker.
I kept being asked by the race relations office at that time to work with crews who were coming in from overseas, you know, from Canada, Germany, Japan, everywhere. They asked me to be a liaison person for them, and these crews invariably wanted access to marae. There's a spiritual thing in it for us, isn't there? Yeah. It's tied, because it means our land, it means our hearts and our spirits. This is why this treaty is so much more important to us. It has never been as important for them, because their hearts
They don't
are
know
not in
anything.
it, not their land.
That's right.
I started to look at, you know, there's a bigger picture here.
Bastion Point, green patch in an urban desert, enclave of valuable real estate, ancestral land of the Ngāti Whātua tribe since mid-18th century, centred in Auckland, New Zealand's largest city. In 1976, government released plans to develop Bastion Point, which included an exclusive housing estate. Ngāti Whātua pressed claims for land to be returned. The protesters reaffirmed their decision to occupy the land. The government threatened them with eviction. Their stand of non-violence was re-emphasized.
Remain still, remain tranquil, remain firm, remain strong, but most important, remain peaceful.
The occupation lasted 506 days. On May 25, 1978, 600 members of the police force, army, and combined state unions moved onto Bastion Point. This film is a record of that day.
A few people at Bastion Point knew that I had been involved in filmmaking, and I mean, it was very little involvement. And they phoned me up about a day before they thought the police were going to arrive to evict them. The reason they gave me for wanting me to make the film rather than, say, television or other people in the media was that they felt it was important that for once the story should be told as it is felt by Māori people.
You know, they were villainized by the press, demonized by anyone who was outside of the perimeter.
Good morning, Graham Osborne with the 10 o'clock news on May the 25th, and it's a historic day for New Zealand. At Bastion Point, a massive army police contingent has moved in to remove the Maori land protesters.
This is the most important part of this history, is happening here, while we can record it and be witness to it, and hundreds of other people would be witness to it. And it won't be just something that children will read in history books, it's something they'll be able to see on the screen. What courage, what strength, what commitment, what dedication to stand and say, you know, in the face of our army and our police and the rest of the country howling for their blood. What extraordinary people from that day forward. You know, I have been fearless because it was as if you'd become part of something greater. It's like a rebirth. It's a kind of like when you fear nothing, you know, when you lose your fear about anything, you know, it makes you that much more powerful. You get so much more strength.
We've been bloody passive for over 100 bloody years. Just the way we get bloody treated for being passive. This is what we get. How much longer must we talk? Must we ask? How much bloody longer?
It took 2 years to edit. It was only 26 minutes. It took 2 years to edit because no one would support it, you know, apart from the Arts Council, which gave us a small grant. And so there was this race to get the film edited. And because the old people in it were by now ill, and I had this fear that some of them would die before the film was completed. And Auntie Hopi, who's in the film, expressed a desire to be the first one to see the film once it was finished. And on the day we received the first print, I phoned her house to say that we finally had the print of Bastion Point, and she had died that morning. I found that heartbreaking.
I've always felt strongly that our land gets taken, the fisheries and forests get taken, and in the same category is our stories. What we see on the screen is only the dominant white monocultural perspective on life. We need to see our own. We need to see our own people up there. We need to be able to identify with our own race. We need to see each other up there, and we need to go out and do it. Before Christianity, the haka was more than just a ceremonial gesture. This was the face of Māoridom the first missionaries encountered.
The Pākehā came in to create divisions, as it were, in New Zealand, and to multiply and to become another race and another people, where before there had only been Maoris.
This struggle was getting harder, and that made us more determined, prepared for bigger conflicts, ready to punch holes into anything to get to the enemy.
The people here are not, their eyes most probably are not as widely open to the pressures. Eventually, they will get the same pressure and a constant fighting against conviction to survive, you know. Yeah, pressures.
I was interviewed for this incredibly important position in television. And I always had the feeling that I should have been bowing down and licking their boots and, you know, be eternally grateful because they gave me my start. But actually, it was Bastian Point and Karanga Hokianga and all those people connected with that gave me my start.
Tēnā no koutou katoa, I roto ia tātou ai tu amaha. Once again, we travel the road of the eternal night with a poroporoaki, a farewell to Rangi Metakingi from Wanganui, who died last week. I was forced to present koha, forced by default of there being no presenters, and the criticism of Māori men about the fact that I was a woman on a marae, i.e. the marae that is koha, that was koha when it first started out, and that I was addressing the nation, and really only men should do that, and only men can mihi the dead, and only men can do this and that. I mean, I got it all the time. I just find it so petty and insulting to the mana of women. And if you look at these old archival films, you see so many things that have become taboo in the modern world, and you realize what shit it is and why people feel it necessary for us to be divided, Māori men and women, is just beyond my range of comprehension. I don't understand it at all, why they would want that division to be there. They offer us these platitudes. Oh, well, the Māori woman's voice is the first one heard from the marae, calling the people in, you know, as if to say, well, you should be satisfied with that, you know, your voice is the first one heard. But I'm not satisfied with that. And I'm not stupid enough to accept that platitude as being a reason why I shouldn't speak on a marae. I just find it insulting.
Do you find that you're pushed or pressured by Māori to tell the stories perhaps that are more hard and political and all the rest of it? Or is there a softness that you can touch without being criticised from your own?
No, I don't. I like a hard edge because there's so many soft edges and there's so much compromise. And I mean, compromise is part of being colonial. You have to compromise to survive. We're often too hard, you know, on our own people. As far as possible, we try hard to maintain a level of integrity that is part of being Māori and telling Māori stories and trying to bring those to the screen. There have been so many projects that have been negative about Māori people, And it's one thing that I'm determined not to give way to.
As if by fate, my mother's life seemed intertwined with the tumultuous events of her era, and when the tensions of the nation reached their highest, the drama would unfold on her own doorstep.
Just over the road from Auckland's International Rugby Ground, the home of Māori filmmaker Merata Mita, whose controversial documentary on the South African tour was made in the teeth of strident government opposition.
We knew something big was happening. Whether we understood it totally, maybe not, but she had made Bastion Point before that, and this was kind of on the same vein.
On September 12, 1980, the anniversary of Steve Biko's death, the New Zealand Rugby Football Union invited white South Africa to send the Springbok team to New Zealand. Rugby with South Africa goes back 60 years to 1921. Up to 1967, Māoris were excluded from teams touring South Africa. The Black South African Rugby Union has never been invited here.
Rugby in New Zealand is like a religion. So she was like the Antichrist. There she was, being an upstart, being radical. She was taking on the old boys club.
They were all saying things like, oh, why doesn't she make nice films? I mean, I couldn't make nice films because they were doing ugly things. Our government was desperate to be re-elected and appealed to all the rural kind of right-wing sort of rugby types. So they decided to go ahead with the tour. There was a lot at stake politically. There was a lot at stake for other women in film as well. And there was a lot at stake for Māoris because I'm the only independent Māori filmmaker there is. At first, I was fortunate in that I had no credibility. I sort of thought, here's this silly woman coming along. And yes, she's had this bit of training in television and that, but they didn't take me seriously as a threat. They thought that if the job were made difficult enough, lack of funding, I wasn't able to hire gear, I wasn't an accredited filmmaker, that all those obstacles in the way would mean that the project would surely fail, that it wouldn't be seen through. So they sort of, there was this benign sort of thing about eventually it'll all go away, but it didn't. The whole sort of ambiguity of fighting racism in South Africa, ignoring racism in New Zealand, thinking that the problem belonged elsewhere, attracted the Maoris behind me, very strongly.
About what's happening to our brothers, they're suffering, same as we're suffering here, same system. If you got the money, well, you might get some justice. Just for if you haven't,
In the name of the voiceless, voteless, and rightless majority of my people, I greet you all.
And she used to take us filming with her.
I went to Hamilton just carrying spare film cans, and they were told where the fence was going to be pulled down before they invaded the pitch, so we were there when it all happened. So Mum didn't tell me anything about it. I thought we were just going in a certain place to film. I remember the fence came down really quickly, and I was actually in shock when I saw that. I thought, oh my God, this is actually happening.
protest break-in at Hamilton's Rugby Park. Here's Graham Moody at the park.
The demonstrators arrived at the ground just a short while ago. They marched past the main gate, and then just a few seconds later, we saw them pouring through the crowd and onto the ground. At the moment, there's a group of around 500 tourists, or over 500 demonstrators anyway, grouped in the centre of the ground. They're standing arm in arm with a police escort around them. Although we've just seen a large cloud of smoke emit from the middle of them, I'm not sure what it is. It might be some sort of a smoke bomb or some sort of gas. I can't really tell what it is. And more police coming out from under the stand to surround the demonstrators and probably keep rugby followers away from the group.
Mum was right there filming all of this. And the reaction of the rugby people after was just disgusting, just indiscriminate violence. At that time, I was really scared for, Mum's safety and everyone else's safety.
The authorities freaked because they did not expect that amount of support, from the groundswell of people, and neither did they expect the strength behind that support, and certainly from me, to keep the project going. A lot of silliness went on at government level, at rugby union level. The matter was raised in Parliament about why someone like me should receive a grant from the Arts Council. The fact that 50% of the New Zealand population got out in the streets and were opposed to this tour meant nothing to them. What you're fighting are these kinds of entrenched attitudes that come from people who control money in the film industry. And you become very angry. You become very angry because it's an unfair fight. And a lot of your energy that can be going into making a fantastic film, a better film, a much more deserving film, is being diverted into fighting these institutions and trying to establish your own set of values.
We had to be very careful because a lot of the rugby supporters blamed the media for drumming up a lot of the protests, which was total bullshit, but that was what the view was.
How would you like it if there was a load of bloody blacks sitting up in our front?
I wouldn't mind that.
You wouldn't mind
No.
that? Just people like you and me. What's the difference?
Yeah.
Just like you and me.
You don't understand. You're the media. You don't
I would have
understand.
been straight in there with the next
You don't
man.
understand.
Feeling was running high from the Hamilton match, and you would have just wanted to stomp him, bust him.
When all this was going on, you were a mother of, I think, 5 children at that time, and in a sense that should have helped. But in some curious irony, it seemed to make it worse. People seemed to think it was totally inappropriate as a mother of 5 children to be doing these things.
Yes, I did think that. You're quite right. They, like she should have been at home in the kitchen and looking after the kids and all that kind of thing.
This boy called me names, this big guy. He told me to go back to my own country. Before, we'd always be kind of talking and laughing a lot, but now we're kind of, there's like a gloom hang all over us.
I had friends saying, oh, my parents told me we're not allowed to play with you anymore because your mum's a radical. I clearly remember the faces telling me that they couldn't keep a friendship with me anymore because of what my mother was doing.
I could tell they were under stress, and because I was under stress myself, I wasn't as good as I should have been in helping to relieve their stress. When you come up against that kind of racism, so raw, it's probably the ugliest thing you have to experience in your lifetime. But the fact of the matter is that when you have children, you have an investment in the future, and so you come out fighting again.
What you did just then, you did for the last time. You do that when there's anything happening and you'll get stomped on or locked up. You realise that?
All persons are warned to stay clear of police lines and 50 yards in advance of the police line.
Get on. Go on. All right. Go on.
Make sure you put them down and make sure you have them.
Let them cook.
Get that camera out of here. I'm warning you. Get that camera out.
The balls and I did nothing.
eventually they had hours and hours and hours of footage from protests all throughout the nation, including meetings. She had film, the police call it evidence. And I suppose we viewed it as evidence too, but evidence of police brutality.
They were constantly trying to get film off her so that they could identify targets or the main protagonists in the Springbok Tour movement. Yeah, the whole time we were wondering whether they were going to come and bust the door down or, just do whatever they could to put pressure on us.
The harassment, coming through the house with dogs on the pretext of looking for film, I don't recall that they ever had warrants. I remember my mum always saying, where's your warrant? Where's your warrant?
I remember Mum being strip searched. Mum spoke of the humiliation. So I began to be aware of not only did this incident happen, but what it felt like for Mum.
I got beaten up by the police when I was 16. Right here, actually. I hadn't done anything. And they just grabbed me and threw me in the back of the car, got me back here, and then gave me a hiding.
Make sure you put them down and make sure you have it.
I was only 15. I couldn't really defend myself. Two big cops. I was just a boy. Yeah, that happened more than once.
I remember being in the hallway, looking down the hallway to the main entrance of the house. My brother is fighting with police. If the policeman put his hand on Mum or something, Richard was the first to react. He sort of bore the brunt of it.
There were a few of them, and they were beating him and kicking him, and Mum just waded in there and told them, to get off her property and to leave her son alone.
I totally underestimated the viciousness that lies just below the surface of, New Zealand society. I totally underestimated the amount of racism that there was and how little it takes, before it comes to the surface. It's just a situation you wouldn't want to put your children into.
Patu continues to impact on our family today.
I think from that time on, I became quite rebellious.
He since had a very has had a very troubled life.
Yeah, no, I don't like police. Sure, they don't like me either.
My own attitudes towards being anti-establishment and anti-police took me down an anti-social path as well. So there's been very real negative consequences for us as a whānau.
It made me into a very angry person, and I'm normally not. When people are kind to me now, I look on it with a great deal of suspicion. In fact, I can't handle that kind of kindness from people anymore. I always think that there's something behind it. I've just got so used to battling. And those are quite self-destructive changes.
That was 2 years of your life went into that. Was it worth it?
In all honesty, when I look back on it, the personal cost, I think, was too high. There was too much against it. I look back on it and think, how awful, and I'll never do it again.
My family was under siege, and I can feel my mother's anger in every frame of Patu. She wanted her films to help create a better future for her children, but her work had put her family in the firing line. At our best, we're the closest family I know in terms of our love for one another, And at our worst, we could probably be described as dysfunctional. But I understand now why my mother sheltered me as she did. She didn't want my future to be determined by the struggles of the past.
I'm glad I was the eldest, actually, because although I had to do a lot of babysitting, it gave me, you know, I could understand what was happening just at times, but yeah, I knew what was going on, so I could sort of understand it and accept it better.
That's quite funny because I'm glad that I'm the youngest because I feel I'm in the same situation.
So you are right. You're even luckier than me in a way, but because you're the youngest, you missed a lot of the struggle. You're Jeff's son, so you came along at a time when things were pretty good. That's just fate.
My mum and dad met on the set of the film Utu, so I owe my life to that movie. I guess you could say my parents were sort of like New Zealand's film power couple of the 80s. My dad, Jeff Murphy, was New Zealand's most successful feature film director of the time, and my mum was the nation's most notorious documentarian. I grew up with everything a kid could ever wish for, and as the baby of the family, you could probably say I was spoiled, but I prefer to think of it as blessed.
Keep them from hanging outside those windows, please.
Don't smoke, okay, Daddy?
I always remember you having anything you ever wanted. Like, you could have turned out to be a selfish kid, or, you know, but you actually turned out not too bad. What a fluke.
The carefree childhood my mother provided was a world apart from the struggles she captured on film. And while she divided opinions here in her own country, the rest of the world saw her differently.
At the end of the showing, there were very few dry eyes in the room. And I was very, very deeply moved. Very deeply moved.
When I went to Europe, they regarded me as a filmmaker in my own right. And there were doors open for me and welcomes extended. And I was very surprised because I wasn't used to that kind of treatment. And it was almost, in some places, red carpet treatment. You know, here was this woman from Polynesia, from the Pacific. They had no idea that I existed. And when they found out that I did exist, they regarded me as a very valuable resource, if you like.
And does that contrast with the way you feel you're seen in New Zealand?
Very much so. I don't think people regard me as a very valuable resource here as much as they regard me as a nuisance.
As a filmmaker, you tend to concentrate a lot on issues on which New Zealanders are divided. Why is that?
Because those kinds of issues where New Zealanders are divided need to be discussed. They need to be exposed. And there is a kind of mentality in this country that would rather have them suppressed. And I think if we're to grow as a nation, if we're to go forward, then we can't do it by continually throwing a mat, you know, over the rubbish on the floor. I think we have to sweep it up sometime and try and pull society together, try and at least create a dialogue between those sides which have become polarized. Otherwise, the result will be an increase in violence and conflict.
It was almost sadistic. You know, the kicking of people when they were down and those baton charges, I found didn't somehow go together with the image that I had of New Zealand.
Wouldn't it be better to discuss the issues here rather than air them overseas?
No, we're not exclusive. The problems that we have here are problems that occur in every other single country in the world. I mean, one of the most important things about Utu and Patu overseas is that they both expose issues that concern countries that have been colonized and concern countries that have done the colonizing. And They've raised these issues again. They've raised them as talking points, as points of dialogue in modern society. And it needs to be discussed here. It needs to be discussed overseas. It needs to be discussed anywhere colonization has taken place.
The first major documentarian who was Indigenous I met was Alanisa Bomsawin, and I met her in 1984 at a film festival in Guelph in Canada, and we were the only two Indigenous people with work screening.
We watched each other's films, and I don't know, it was a very important feeling. It was as if we knew each other for a long time, although we never met.
When I think of that meeting of Alanis and Merata in Guelph with the first pairing of the two films, I tend to think of that as like the creation moment. We think of why, curators return to think of any art, the early practitioners. Why are we still interested in the Lumières or Méliès or, the people that started film? Or why are we still interested in Godard or the people that started the French New Wave? It's because they were the spark that actually set the fire. And so for Indigenous cinema, it really does trace back to Merata and Alanis.
I felt there was a lot of feeling and experience that were very similar in terms of fighting for a voice for our people. I think we became very closely related, as if we're like a sister. And of course, we drink whiskey together.
As a kid, I traveled around the world with my mum. We could be going to a film festival in Canada with Alanis, or she could be doing a documentary on the Million Man March in Washington, D.C. Or even working with my dad in Hollywood.
We're shooting this way to leave this side clear for him. Ours are coming this way, all yours will be coming down this way and gathering in here, I understand.
I didn't understand the significance of any of this because I was too young and had nothing else to compare it to. Only now do I realize how surreal it must have been for the rest of my whānau.
Going overseas, that was a big buzz. We'd come from poverty to staying in Fifth Ave in New York and staying in a big mansion in Atlanta with a swimming pool and a snooker pool room and things like that. It was just like, it's quite hard to talk to people about it because they believe the poverty part, but when you tell them that you've been traveling overseas and all that and staying in flash places, no one believes you. They think you're bullshitting. It's like...
Eventually, my parents and I settled in Hawaii, which I certainly had no complaints about. It was the place closest to home where my mum could have access to the world, and the world could have access to her.
Having to travel, I was able to say, look, this is happening in Canada, this is happening in Hawaii, this is happening. And it kind of started the link of awareness about Indigenous struggles all over the world.
I saw Bastion Point in my Hawaiian language class. It came back by one of our teachers who had been there, and I didn't know and had not met Merata. So what she's saying is true from our point of view too. We learned about their struggles, and I didn't even know until this very meeting that Merata made that film.
She tried to build capacity, I think, here.
Amongst Indigenous peoples.
Amongst Indigenous peoples.
So not just the Māori-Hawaiian connection, which is real obvious because we were so closely related, right? But between us and then Native Americans and the continental.
Canadians as
well as Native Indigenous people of Canada. And
the Sami people.
And the Sami, So there are all sorts of Indigenous peoples that she was connected to because of all the work that she did. All of her mahi really afforded her these relationships, and she brought them with her wherever she went.
My connection with Merata and inviting her to be a part of what we were doing here at Sundance was the beginning, was the real inception of this program, actually beginning to see it beyond just, the national lines of this country. This idea of us being Native American to this one body of land but actually that we're part of a global presence of Indigenous people. And there's 1 billion Indigenous people on this planet. And so, you know, for us to begin to actually connect with one another, which has really happened over the last 20 years through the arts, that relationship with Sundance beginning to do that was through your mother.
I'd heard her speak on these panels with our workshop. Like, I knew she had a perspective, and she had such a great nurturing sensibility about how to nurture and support a voice in film.
To understand what's going on in these other countries.
I walked into her session that she was doing with the Native filmmakers, and she had everybody captivated. And I remember her commenting in a context to all of the filmmakers about the importance of their life experience, that they needed to remember that their parents and their families and their tribes did whatever they had to do in order to survive. Sometimes a lot of the results of that weren't always the best or the most positive circumstances that maybe we grew up in, or that our lives were sitting in that moment, but that we shouldn't try to hold grudges or judgment against that.
Despite her international successes, our trips back home were always modest. By this time, my siblings were all living their own lives and starting families of their own. But Mum always made a point of getting us together when she could.
From 0 to 10 of how many I've tasted in my life, which must number thousands now, I give this an 8.5.
We would even visit Koro and go pipi picking on Maketu Beach. She would tell us her mother's stories about the whales and others from her early childhood.
Hey, look, a starfish.
Those are the only times I remember her speaking to me about her past. But by then, her focus was firmly on the future.
My primary goals is to decolonize the screen and to indigenize a lot of what we see up there. I see the style developing. It's something from the collective cultural consciousness that comes from, you know, way back in time. Indigenizing the screen means bringing stories that have not been seen by the world before, and understanding that the time that those stories are on screen is the time that we've captured not only the space up there, but we've captured the hearts and minds of the audience.
She was really the first mentor that I had, you know, somebody who was an authority about film. She was going to support you and help you find your voice as a filmmaker. She would do it in such a way that you really felt that love, but at the same time, you felt that, like, a sense of responsibility, a sense of, like, you have to stand up for yourself, and you have to find yourself within this.
She had this like history behind her in her films, and what her films represented and what she represented. It was about changing history, and it was about changing the way Native people, Maori people, were perceived by the rest of the world. And so she came at it with that much weight and that much like power, like that's what you can do.
Having someone in the mix that you didn't have to explain your culture and why you're writing it a particular way. She sort of instinctively knew that there was struggles that you were coping with.
Whereas like in other cases with other mentors through Sundance, they always had kind of a preconceived notion of like how an Indigenous film should be delivered, or just the script in that matter. So, because a lot of times they always get like mentors who are always trying to like, hey, maybe this character should have like a spirit guide or some shit. It's just like, no, like fuck that noise. Like, but then thinking about like Merata would never say that to me. She would never give me that type of stupid note.
Yeah, I went to school with him. He was a good student, like you, full of potential.
What does the word mean? Potential.
It's 3:30, mate. I'm off duty.
She was a big part of the development process in my script boy. The first draft of that was pretty dramatic and yeah, you know, just typical New Zealand depressing film.
What was she like? Not this again. Well, she was pretty, she was a good singer, and her and Dad were always laughing. How did they meet? At the beach. She was swimming. Her dad saved her from drowning, and then he got a carving of her, and then they had babies. Us.
She reminded me, you know, that's sort of my point of difference in filmmaking is like, you know, is trying to maybe take a serious situation and inject it with a lot of this sort of irreverence or humor, and that's what would make Boy more interesting.
All them commies got scared and ran away.
One of the best things about growing old is if you start out and you're alone, and then all these hundreds of young people come forward with enormous talents, huge talents, sometimes too big for the screen. I didn't get the sense of loneliness or of isolation and so on. I got the sense of these large families or these large communities working together, and I think that's, you know, that's a brilliant thing for someone like myself. I always felt that I gave enough, or in some cases that perhaps I gave too much. But then you don't give anything to be appreciated or to be thanked. You give because that's what you're supposed to do. You know, that's what we're all meant to do. You know, it's good to learn these things, especially when you get to my age and you're on the brink of you know, when you become very aware of your mortality. And so, you know, and when you pass through these things, you know, you think, oh, I've got to be good in every sense of the word, you know. I have to treat people better. I have to learn to love better. I have to give more.
So what's ahead of Merata now?
I have a couple of projects in the wind bubbling bubbling away. Like I've been asked to direct a film, and overseas I've got, you know, work on offer as well to make feature films. So I have got quite a fortunate sort of future ahead of me if I handle it wisely.
But within a few months of this interview, Mum would pass away. My mother died suddenly while in the process of editing a documentary on child abuse in the Māori community. And despite the shock of her loss, I actually can't think of a more fitting way for her story to end. Just sitting along there. I always took for granted that there would be an opportunity for me to ask her about her life myself. I regret not ever hearing about the past from her. Mum transitioned through so many different phases in life, it's almost impossible to gather all of the threads in one story. To be honest, the more I learn about her, the more questions I have. But the question that bothers me the most is whether or not the impact she had on the world was worth the many sacrifices. A lot of the difficulty fell upon you and your siblings. Do you think that the struggles that you had to go through were worth the ultimate results?
Yeah, I do, because, you know, she was so committed to her art that I saw that. And she wouldn't have had to have been, you know, she got a lot of plaudits in her later life through things like Sundance and that, but she wouldn't have needed those for me to recognise that.
If you look at where we are in Makatu, from this a very simple Māori community to Beverly Hills, it seems like another planet. It's a long, long way away. But you know what? It didn't change Mum.
Having gone through all the adversity that she went through with all us kids and her grandkids, I think, yeah, that to me is what I'm most proud of, rather than what she did.
I think our relationships, born out of our shared experiences and the things that we endured, brought us close together.
The family is the major thing in my life that has given me the will to be the kind of person that I am, given me the courage to be, because they're always there. I mean, through all my trials and ups and downs in life, the five of them have always been with me. And I've never had to join, you know, real support groups or committees or so on, because every time I came home, there was one waiting for me in the kitchen. And they've been a continual source of strength to me. And I often wonder why, you know, when I look at the kind of life they've been through.
It was bigger than the individual. It was bigger than us, just as a family. And so I'm able to rationalize the things that I went through or things that we went through collectively, and I can comfortably place it somewhere in my mind where I feel that it was worth it.
If I had to do it 10 times over, I would do it. I would do it all again with her. No reservation. I believed in what she was doing and the work that she did, and I knew she had those regrets about how it had affected us. And like, bro, I understand that. But yeah, and that's what it's just hard to think to ever have to go through all of that again. But I would, for her, and I believed in her. You know, as an adult looking back, you know, as hard as it was, I would do it all over again with her.
Looking back on what my siblings went through compared to my upbringing, I can't help but feel incredibly blessed. It's not the material privilege that I'm thankful for. What I'm thankful for is the love of family our mother nurtured in all of us. I truly believe that had my mum been in the position to provide for them what she gave me, she would have. And I feel now more than ever that it is up to me to make the most of the advantages I've received in life. But beyond the impact on me, or our family, I realize now that the love she had for us made a greater impact. Only a mother could have done the things she did, and it wasn't money or power or war that decolonized the screen. It was a mother's love.